Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and it's Saturday, and that means it's time for another edition of Nizzanotes, my weekly vlog series where I talk about limited magic. We're at the very beginning of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty limited season, and as usual, the first video I do about a new limited format in Nizzanotes is one that looks at the best commons and uncommons in each color. This is sort of a Cliff's Notes version of my set review where I gave grades and thoughts about every single card in the set. If you don't have time to watch all of that content, or you just want to hear some things reinforced, that's kind of what this video can do, where I'll talk about the three best commons and the one best uncommon in each color. And I'm actually going to talk about the best uncommon artifact and the best common artifact, because there's enough artifacts in this set that I think it's worth doing. All right, let's dive in with white first, where I think the third best common is Sunblade Samurai. So I just really value the modality here. The fact that in the early game you can throw this away for a plains and a couple of life is a pretty good deal. And then in the later part of the game, it has respectable stats as a 5-mana 4/4 with vigilance, and it also happens to be a samurai, and it's really not a bad one to attack on its own either, because vigilance allows it to, get all of those buffs but still hang back and block for you on your opponent's turn. So Sunblade Samurai is pretty good. I don't think I would first pick Sunblade Samurai. It'd have to be a pretty weak pack, but I definitely wouldn't feel bad about picking one up like 4th or 5th pick or something like that. Next up, we've got Befriending the Moths. I think that's the second best white common. It comes down and immediately gives flying in +1/+1 to a creature, does it again on the next turn, and then you get a reasonable flyer out of the deal. You end up getting a ton out of this card. I mean, if you're not an aggressive deck, it's definitely a little less good, but I think generally speaking, it coming down and doing its thing on the first two chapters is just going to be enough to really alter a race in your favor, and then you get a nice flyer at the end. Seems like pretty good value to me. I think you could first pick Befriending the Moths in a pack. You could first pick it, but it had to be pretty weak, but it could happen. And I think the best white common is Intercessor's Arrest. This is premium removal for white. We've sort of seen these cards go up and down lately depending on the format. And this format does have a sacrifice deck in black-red, but it's mostly about sacrificing artifacts. So I don't think it's going to be a liability against those decks. I think it's a pretty good removal spell. It shuts down basically everything important a creature can do in the format. And it also has some enchantment synergy. The flip side of that is there's also more ways than normal to blow up enchantments in people's main decks, but I think it ends up sort of being a wash. You can get some extra value out of running enchantments, but it's also easier to blow up. And I think the best white uncommon is Touch the Spirit Realm. This is the Oblivion Ring effect that white tends to get in most limited formats these days. It's very efficient removal, it's flexible, and the channel part here, you're probably going to use it a very low percentage of the time, but it is upside on a card that is already excellent. And that upside can do some stuff. I mean, it's flexible. You can use it on your opponent's stuff to get a blocker out of the way. You can use it to rebind into the battlefield ability. You can use it to save your bomb. I mean, those things are all pretty real effects. And when it's stapled onto a card that's already excellent, the upside is real. And I'd definitely be happy, by the way, first picking both Intercessor's Arrest and Touch the Spirit Realm. Now let's move to blue. I think the third best blue common is Moon Circuit Hacker. This creature just has decent stats and a decent ability when it hits your opponent, getting to loot. But what really makes it one of the best commons is its ninjutsu ability, which costs only 1 blue mana and ends up just straight up netting you a card, because the turn it comes into play, you don't have to discard a card after you draw it. And it just seems like Moon Circuit Hacker is going to feel like an Elvish Visionary on steroids all the time, and that's a very good common card to have. I think the second best blue common is Tamayo's Completion. I almost wanted to put this at number 1, but I've been burned by so many blue removal spells over the years that look like they're premium that I'm a little skeptical here. I'm protecting myself a little bit here, I guess. But it is a really good card. What makes it better than most of the ones we've seen before, most of these cards that tap down an opposing thing and keep it tapped, is that it just shuts off everything. And normally that's not what we get. It's another card with enchantment upside, but there's also some downside that comes with it. And I think the best blue common is Moon Snare Specialist. At worst, this is a 4-mana 2/2 that bounces an opposing thing. We've seen that card be a really good common in the past, and this one comes with an ninjutsu upside that can sometimes really screw up your opponent's board. You can get rid of one of their creatures who's blocking or that they were using a trick on. things like that. All kinds of wacky things can happen when you're putting it into play using ninjutsu, and when you're not putting it into play with ninjutsu, it's already a very good card. And I'd feel pretty good about first picking all three of these blue commons, honestly. So that's probably good for blue. And I think the best blue uncommon is Replication Specialist. So it's a 5 mana 3/4 flyer. That's a body that's like generally playable ish. And then it has a very powerful ability that allows you to, well, replicate your non token artifacts. So you do have to have like the kicker mana. You sort of pay a kicker of 1 generic and a blue to copy a thing. But that's not a huge ask. You're going to get this thing down. It's going to be a problem in the air for your opponent. And then every artifact you play that costs, a normal amount of mana, you can also double. And it's really going to help add to your board in a hurry. Obviously, you do sort of need to be in an artifact deck, but there's so many artifacts in this format, and this has such a reasonable floor that I still think it's a great card, and I would be really happy to first pick it. Now let's move to black. So for the third best black common, I had kind of a hard time picking one. I wasn't that impressed with black's commons. I mean, I think the number 1 and number 2 are pretty obvious. The number 3, it took me a while to decide on, but ultimately I went with Okiba Reckoner Raid. This is a cool saga that you can play on turn 1 and it drains your opponent. It does that the first 2 times. And then you get a pretty nice creature out of the deal, a 2/2 menace that also gives your vehicles menace. The card is good. It just doesn't feel like maybe third best black common good. One of the cool upsides it has is with ninjutsu because of the fact that it has menace. It might be a nice thing to use with ninjutsu. And if you can do that, you get it back, you get to play it again and drain your opponent. And sometimes that's going to be pretty real. It's definitely a nice card, but it's not incredible, and I don't think I want to be first picking it. You definitely get a lot for your mana, but it's a little slow. I don't know. Maybe it'll end up deserving this slot in the end. It's definitely not a bad card, just not one I'm super excited about either. I think the second best black common is Lethal Exploit. So 1 in a black to give -2/-2 to something at instant speed isn't amazing. But there's so many ways to modify creatures in this format that just having 1 in play isn't a huge ask. And once you're there, you're at a very good card, and sometimes it'll do even more. It is certainly held back by the fact that as a baseline, it just is a 2 mana to give -2/-2 to something. But that is a card that you'd usually play anyway, even if it's not a premium removal type spell. So it's not like the floor is bad, and it has a pretty nice ceiling. So I do think it's black's second best common, and I would first pick it. And I think black's best common is Twisted Embrace. This is an enchantment that gives +1/+1 to the creature you put it on, and then it lets you kill an opposing creature. That's just going to give you a ton of value. You actually get to add to the board while killing a thing, and that's a pretty good way to do it. There are some downsides with a card like this, namely that you need to be a little bit careful about what you're putting it on and whether your opponent can respond. But one cool thing is you can put this on an artifact or even a vehicle that isn't a creature. So if you're worried your opponent can kill your creature in response, stick it on a vehicle that's not crewed. And then you get to still kill a thing, and they're less likely to blow up your vehicle in response. And then if you crew your vehicle, it actually gets the bonus, but you can actually put it on any artifact if you really feel concerned. But in general, it's probably better to wait until your opponent doesn't have mana up and the ability to interact anyway. But either way, it's premium removal. It's going to feel great when you cast this and blow up your opponent's thing, and suddenly you have a creature that can attack even harder than it could before you cast it. I had a hard time settling on black's best uncommon too, but it's for a good reason. It's because I think there are so many good black uncommons. And in the end, for me, the 2 that I wanted to talk about, I ended up cutting it down to 2. I still couldn't get it to 1. But the 2 I want to talk about are first Assassin's Ink, which is just a premium removal spell that will often cost less than 4 mana. When it costs 4, it's already really good. And the other one is Gravelighter, which is certainly the more interesting card. It's a 3 mana 2/2 flyer that has some effect when it enters the battlefield. It depends on what's going on. If something has died, you get to draw a card, and if something hasn't died, it's a Symmetrical Edict. And either of those options are usually going to benefit you, even the Edict, because you're adding something to your board while making your opponent lose something, and you might also lose something too, but at least you also just played your creature. But what I really like about the card, I think the design on it is really interesting because in the early game, when things aren't dying as much is when an Edict is at its best, because your opponent's less likely to have something just to throw away that they don't really want. And then in the later game, when stuff is dying and an edict effect is less powerful, it's more likely to draw you a card. And the thing that really sells me on this, in addition to the nice stats and its ability to net you cards, is that it's good with ninjutsu. The fact that it's a small evasive creature with an enter the battlefield ability just means that with the ninjutsu mechanic, it can do all kinds of wacky things. It also means it's good with all the equipment and stuff in the set too. I'm leaning towards Gravelighter, but it might just be because I like the card more. Whereas Assassin's Ink is like, hey, look, it's the premium black removal spell we have in every set at uncommon. Gravelighter is definitely more interesting. Let's move now to red. I think red's third best common is Simian Sling. This is a nice little one drop that punishes the opponent for blocking. It happens to be an artifact, which a bunch of decks in the format care about. And it's also equipment, which the red-green deck, the modification deck, really cares about. And the boost it gives is not insignificant. We saw it on Tormentor's Helm a few sets ago. I guess it was like a year ago at this point. But we saw Tormentor's Helm be a very similar card and really punish opponents, really be great in aggressive decks. And, the sling is easier to remove because it's a creature when you don't have it reconfigured onto something. But it's going to have a similar impact. The difference is you can play it early, attack with it a time or two, and then reconfigure it onto something else, make it able to attack, and that's going to feel pretty good. I think the second best red common is Voltage Surge. So for 1 red mana, it lets you do 2 to a creature. That's already a card you basically always play. You can trade up a lot doing that. And then it comes with the nice added upside of doing 4 if you're willing to sacrifice something. And that's a pretty good deal in terms of mana. And the black-red deck especially just likes sacrificing stuff anyway. So in some ways, it's going to be upside rather than downside to give stuff up when you cast Voltage Surge. And at number 1, I have Kami's Flare. I was talking about how the uncommon black premium removal spell is uninteresting. The 2 mana instant that does 3 to a thing is also kind of interesting, but it's also definitely very good. It's going to let you trade up a lot. It's an instant. And this even has the additional modification upside of doing 2 to your opponent. And if you're like an aggressive modification deck and you use this and attack your opponent, it's going to feel devastating for them sometimes. And then I think the best uncommon in red is Twin Shot Sniper. This little 4 mana 2/3 with reach does 2 to anything when it enters the battlefield. That means it'll give you a 2-for-1 a lot of the time. You can use it, also to go after your opponent's face if they're at low enough life. And it even comes with Channel, where more efficiently, like if the part you're really interested in is the 2 damage, well, you can just have that part if you want it. I think in an ideal world, you're casting this Twin Shot Sniper. You're going to get more value that way. And then it also overlaps into the artifact deck. I mean, I guess if you can find a way to get in with it, you can do some wacky ninjutsu stuff with it too. Not that it's especially evasive or anything, but Twin Shot Sniper I do think is red's best uncommon. And I think I'd feel okay about first picking all of these. Maybe Simian Sling a little bit less, but the 2 common removal spells in the Sniper definitely would feel good about. Next, let's move to green, where I think the third best common is Tales of Master Sashiro. This looks like a really good sort of top curve to have in a green deck. It comes down, gives you a +1/+1 counter and vigilance. This will turn on some of your modification stuff if you have that going on. It also just enables attacks that you probably didn't have before. And then it does it again the next turn. And then you get a very real creature. Even though you get that creature kind of late, a 5/5 with haste and vigilance is relevant pretty much all game long. So you end up getting a ton of value out of this. You can't really run, you don't want to jam like 3 of these into your deck, most likely. Probably want to max out at 2 since it costs 5. But it does seem like a pretty great thing to have at the top of your curve if you're a more aggressive deck. And it really seems good in any green deck. It's also an enchantment. Green-white really cares about that. So yeah, Tales of Master Shishiro looks good. I think you can even first pick it. Jukai Preserver, I think, is the second best green common. This is another card that modifies your stuff. And on its own, it's a 4 mana 3/3 that puts a counter on itself. So it's a 4 mana 4/4, which will trigger enchantment things and modification things all on its own. And then it also has Channel, and sometimes it'll be more effective to use it sort of as a trick to spread out a couple of counters. Casting it, like with a lot of these, casting it is the way you're probably getting the most value. But most of the time, most of the time you want to cast it, but sometimes things present themselves where you want to use the Channel. And when those situations do present themselves, it's going to be pretty good. And then I think the green's best common is Master's Rebuke. Again, kind of an unexciting card. It's the rabid bite type card that green always gets these days. It's an instant speed version of it, but it's just a great removal spell. Green has big creatures that can use this really effectively. The fact it's an instant helps cut down on the downside that you need a creature of a certain size and you need your opponent to be unable to interact with what you're doing. So yeah, it's a really good, it's green's common premium removal spell. And again, I think all three of these commons feel pretty good about first picking. And I think green's best uncommon, and I think it's just the best uncommon in the set, is Roaring Earth. This thing is crazy. If you play this on turn 2, it's going to be pretty hard for you to lose most games, provided you get some creatures in play, because generating a creature token every time you play a land is just going to overwhelm your opponent. And that would be true in a format that didn't have modification payoffs and stuff like this format has. It would be true anyway. But what really pushes this, into being great is the fact that if you do draw it late, which normally this would not be good if you drew it late, you'd be like, oh, great, But if you do it in this case, you can still channel it. And sure, you don't get an efficient creature out of the deal, but you get something, and that's a huge deal on top of how insane it is on turn 2. Like I said, I do want to talk about the best artifact uncommon and the best artifact common, and I guess by artifact I mean colorless artifact. So I think the best common colorless artifact is Searchlight Companion. This is just be a good card in any format. 3 mana for 1/1 that has flying and a 1/1 token is just a good deal. It wouldn't be amazing in just any format, but in this format, it gets some big upgrades. It's an artifact in a format that's obsessed with them, and it's also good with ninjutsu in a format where that matters. It's one of the sweeter sort of commons you can combo with your ninjutsu creatures because it's evasive, and so it's easy to get in, and you can return it to your hand. But recasting, it also means you get another token. So Searchlight Companion looks pretty sweet. Don't think you first pick it, but certainly if you're in an artifact or a ninja deck, it's going to be a card you're interested in. And I think the best colorless artifact uncommon is Circuit Mender. It's just, a nice little 3 mana 2/3 that just gives you value. It's make sure you gain life when it comes down, and then it replaces itself. And one cool thing about it is no matter how it leaves play, you get to draw a card. It's not evasive, like Searchlight Companion, but if you can combine this with ninjutsu, it's absurd because you return it to your hand, draw a card, replay it, gain the life, and it's going to die again or get removed from play one way or another again, and you're going to draw another card. So there's some sweet things you can do with Circuit Mender, and it just happens to be in an artifact where that really matters, in a set where that really matters. So those are my picks for the best commons and uncommons in each color and the best common and uncommon colorless artifact. Now, like we usually do in the early part of new formats, we're going to close things out with a Crack-a-Pack, where we're going to look at a pack one, pick one scenario. I'll talk about the cards in the pack, how I feel about them, and then I'll tell you what I would first pick. So here is our pack. We have a basic land, of course. Then we have Wanderer's Intervention. This is an okay removal spell. It's situational, and if a creature has more than 4 toughness, obviously it's not impressive, but it's fine. Certainly a solid playable, maybe even a little more than solid. In fact, it might be White's 4th best common. It's up there, but I hope we don't first pick it either way. Aki Warpaint, don't love it. I get it. It's an enchantment. There's things like care about that in this format. More importantly, it's a modification, which matters in the red-green deck. But I just can't get behind this kind of cheap aura most of the time that just doesn't do anything other than buff a creature. You need something else going on with the card to make that risk worth it, and I don't see it here. I don't plan on playing Aki Warpaint in basically any of my decks unless I end up in like the most aggressive red-green modification deck ever. I'm not going to play it. Peerless Samurai. I like this little card. It has a nice combination of things going on. It has Menace, which is great to combine with the Samurai deck's sub-theme of attacking alone. So it's harder to block than most things. And then if you get all of these other attack alone things tacked onto it, it becomes a real problem. And it has its own ability that's pretty nice, which is that whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, it makes the next spell you cast that turn cost 1 less. I think I would still take Wanderer's Intervention ahead of it, but they're very close. Inkrise Infiltrator, this thing is fine. I mean, if you're in a black deck, especially the black-blue deck, it's something you're going to play frequently because, well, it's a ninja, which that matters, but also it helps enable ninjutsu because it's small and evasive. But I would definitely take Intervention and Samurai over it. Spell Pierce, this is pretty much unplayable and limited. It's a key card in constructed sideboards, but it just doesn't line up well in limited basically ever. You won't find yourself in a situation where you can use it often enough for it to be in your deck. Careful Cultivation. This is all right. I mean, if you're in the ramp deck, which generally means blue-green, it does the job, but it's nothing special. I would definitely take still the Samurai or the Intervention. Return to Action. This is an okay trick, that lets you get your creature back. It's particularly fun to use with creatures with Enter the Battlefield abilities. It gains you some life. It does a lot of nice little things, but it's still not as good as Intervention or the Samurai. Gift of Wrath. This is an okay aura. I mean, I wouldn't play it over the Intervention or the Peerless Samurai, but what I do want to say is that it's actually a playable one, unlike Aki Warpaint, and the reason for that is that it makes sure that if you do get blown out, if your creature gets blown up after you put this on it, you at least get left with something. So it gives you the upside of an aura that makes your creature bigger and evasive, and it triggers some modification stuff. And then it also sort of makes sure that you're not left completely holding the bag when things go sideways. Next up, it's Sunblade Samurai, and I think this will become our new first pick. We just talked about this card as White's third best common. I like that it's got decent stats and vigilance, and the thing that really pushes it over is Channel, which, allows you to make sure you hit land drops early and gain some life. Next up, we've got Kamano faces Kakazan. This thing is pretty strong in a really aggressive deck, especially if you play it on turn 1. It does sort of have diminishing returns as the game goes on. It gets harder to get anything out of Chapter 2, and a 2/2 with haste isn't nearly as good. I would definitely take the Samurai over it, as well as, and by Samurai I mean Sunblade Samurai, and I think also Wanderer's Intervention. Next, we have Prosperous Thief. This thing is nice. It's a nice ninja with a powerful ninja payoff that gives you a treasure anytime one of your ninjas or rogues, if one or more hits your opponent, you get a treasure, and that is pretty sweet. It gives you fixing in blue, and it also has ninjutsu for 1 and a blue, which makes it extra interesting. And I think I've shifted to Prosperous Thief over Sunblade Samurai at this point. I think it's the best card in the pack. It's the only one that we've looked at so far that I think I'd feel good about first picking. Sunblade Samurai, I would do it, but I kind of hope there's something better. And there's Prosperous Thief. Next, we've got Gloom Shrieker, the black-green signpost uncommon. It is powerful. 3 mana, 2/1 with Menace that, if you play it at the right time, draws you a card, is pretty sweet. And it is more powerful than Prosperous Thief for sure, but being a gold card, I'm not really that interested in taking it when there's other cards in the pack of a comparable power level, and I'd say Prosperous Thief is. Containment Construct is an interesting one. It doesn't have a whole lot of build-aroundy stuff going on in the format to support its crazy ability, which is that you can play cards until the end of your turn if you discard them and exile them. That combines with Channel really interestingly. If you have Sunblade Samurai and you happen to have 7 mana available, you can channel it and cast the Samurai, which is pretty wacky. But it is such a build around that I don't think you ever want to first pick it. And then our rare is Inventive Iteration. This is a powerful saga. Chapter 1, unlike some of these, actually does something to the board right away, which is that it bounces a thing. Chapter 2 nets you a card, and then Chapter 3 gives you a pretty real creature that can sometimes even interfere with what your opponent's doing. And I think in the end, this is going to be a pack where we take the rare. I don't think Inventive Iteration is a bomb exactly. I think I gave it a B in the set review. That means it's a very good card, though, and it certainly is. It just gives you a ton for the mana, like all the sagas, but it also actually does stuff with its first 2 chapters that net you additional value, and that's what really sells me on it. So I think I would go Inventive Iteration, Prosperous Thief, Sunblade Samurai. I think those are my top 3 picks. I mean, I guess if we were dipping down to Sunblade Samurai, it'd probably be Gloom Shrieker third, actually, because it's just so much more powerful than the Samurai, even if it is gold. So actually, it's Iteration, Thief, Gloom Shrieker, then the Samurai. So that's what I would do in this pack 1, pick 1 scenario, and that'll do it for this edition of Nizzanotes. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future editions of Nizzanotes, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.